Yeah, failure is an interesting concept. Is it possible to fail? Is it actually possible to fail? If you attempt to jump, let's say you have a high jump, a bar, and you want to jump over it and you attempt to jump over it, well, you've succeeded in attempting to jump over it. You may say you failed at jumping over it, but you didn't actually jump over it. So your failure, the thing that you think you failed, doesn't actually exist, but you did succeed at actually jumping over the thing, If you don't attempt it, is that failure? You didn't attempt it, so you didn't fail because you didn't attempt it either. You just stayed in the same spot. If you try 50 times and each time you don't make it over the bar, but you attempt it every time and you keep going, so you're successfully, continually attempting. You're successfully, continually, almost getting over it. Every time you're succeeding in almost getting over it, every time. And obviously, eventually you succeed at jumping all the way over it, so you never actually fail. Isn't that funny? People are terrified of failure, aren't they? That's a huge one for people. Absolutely terrified of failure, a lot of people. Which is imaginary, obviously. They imagine themselves failing at something, and so they don't attempt to do the thing, so the failure doesn't actually exist. They're terrified of something that isn't real. An imaginary terror puts the brakes on people in life, often. Isn't that funny? It's not funny, but, it's an odd thing to notice. No such thing as failure. You are a perfect human being, always, aren't you? You're always being perfectly. You're listening, you're hearing, you're seeing, you're feeling, you're tasting, you're touching, you're aware, you're present. You are being, always, you're always being. Unless you die, you're dead, and then, well, that's a different topic. But obviously, failure, the concept of failure is a huge part of our culture, human being culture. It was Yoda, wasn't it? He said, "There is no try, do or do not. If you do not, you are successfully not doing. And if you do, you are successfully doing." So you had an imaginary objective. So you failed the imaginary objective. So the thing that you failed didn't happen. Do you understand? Your failure is imaginary. Your failure is always imaginary. The thing that you think you wanted to achieve didn't actually happen. Reality went in a different direction. So reality is always successful, obviously, because it's always what happens. So your failure is always imaginary. The only reason I bring this up is not a kind of semantic argument in the sense of like trying to be clever, but just in the sense of it's all about perspective. People put tremendous amounts of pressure on themselves and crush themselves with the concept of failure. And yet, if you just have a slight shift in perception and look at the tremendous amount of successes that you have on a daily basis as a human being, by being, it can and does make you feel very differently about yourself, and often that motivates great change and happiness and inspiration and courage, etc. Well, if you say that you fail to take care of yourself, it's the same It's the same, isn't it? If I let go of all sense of self and all motivation to continue to live, then I am very, very successfully becoming depressed. Now, if I follow that to its core, if I follow that line of behaviour to its absolute end without distraction, I will very, very, very quickly become extremely miserable. Which is wonderful, because when you hit that place of misery, deep, deep, deep misery, there's only one way to go from there, and that's back up. Misery is one of the greatest teachers in life. It really is. As you kind of gave us an example of earlier, you were in, a fear of failure and suffering. So you had fallen into a state of despair. Spend enough time in that state of despair, honestly with yourself, honestly in misery. And the processes that you have deep inherent within you will once again reignite and kickstart the fire. It may take a long time, a very, very long time, but inevitably go deep enough into misery and it's either death or evolve. So either way, you're taking a big step on your journey. It's one of these interesting points that it reminds me of some personal experiences with regards to a couple of different mystical traditions and a couple of different mystics that I met in my life. One of them was a Taoist and one of them was a Buddhist. And the Buddhist was a very, very strict Buddhist, as in a follower of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, however you want to say his name. What they call the historical Buddha, so not the one that the Tibetans tend to kind of have a different idea of what the Buddha is. Anyway, getting off track a bit. But the Buddhists were never allowed to encourage people to go towards misery or hell or despair. They always have to encourage people to follow the teachings of the Buddha, live in accordance with what the Buddha taught leads to enlightenment, the ending of suffering. Okay, very nice, very good, thank you very much. It's very positive, it's lovely, nice and friendly. But the Taoist, he could do that too. It really depended on the person and where they were at. But he was absolutely never to hesitate to encourage a person into hell and into misery if he could see, and this particular person had a very strong perception, a very strong ability to observe what was going on, to see into a person. And if he could see that that person was going towards hell, he would help them get there quicker and encourage them to become much, much more miserable and to go very deeply, quickly into the pain and suffering that they seemed to be wanting to go towards. And I saw it repeatedly work and help that person along into hell. And in most cases, the person descended into hell, realized their error, which error is similar to the term failure in this sense. That's where they wanted to go, so they went there, and they successfully descended into the depths of despair, and so saw the lesson that they needed to see, saw into their own confusion or anxiety or fear or suffering or ego, however you want to term it, and then from there boomeranged back to begin the journey out of despair. So how can you ever really say it's right or wrong, or it's a failure or an error or a correct way, really? Ultimately, there's no such thing. Ultimately. But some people don't live in an ultimate reality, do they? Yeah, it's conceptual. So is wrong, so is failure. It's conceptual. Which means it's about perspective. Are you looking at it from here, or are you looking at it from here? Depending on where you're looking at it from will influence which way you see it. So it's ultimately, the ultimate reality is neither. But yes, of course, conceptually, if I want to climb on top of the roof and I lie down on the floor, that's incorrect. That's wrong. But in the sense of ultimate reality, you successfully laid down on the floor, so you get it right every time, even when you get it wrong. But that's a weird... Ultimate reality is a weird dimension.